And welcome to our discussion, Rethinking Security for the DoD Cloud and Tactical Edge, sponsored by Microsoft on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. Our guest today, Susie Adams, Chief Technology Officer at Microsoft Federal. And thanks for being here with us, Susie. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And so the way to get into this, I think, is, federal agencies have had ambitions and mandates and sometimes even some successes adopting cloud technologies for at least as long as I've been working in this job, which is a little over 7 years now. But I think one thing you can say about that time frame is the market's changed quite a bit, both in terms of how technology customers want to deploy cloud technologies and in terms of the service offerings that are out there. So just as a way to get into this, talk a bit about that evolution from your perspective. I mean, how has the market changed in recent years in terms of how cloud technologies work together, and how a DoD organization, for purposes of our discussion, can realistically make use of those technologies?
Sure. So I agree. A lot has changed since we first started this started this journey inside the government as a whole. I can remember back in 2010 when GSA put out the first infrastructure as a service BPA, and everybody was bidding. We bid Azure, and there's Amazon, and everybody started to get into the marketplace. And then we had the email as a service BPA. And I think email is really where the federal government started to jump off into the cloud and looking at just the collaboration suite of tools and really being able to deliver dial tone for just, standard everyday things that information workers needed to do in the business. And that's the same thing that we're seeing with Department of Defense, right? Obviously, they're now starting the adoption of email and collaboration tools with Office 365 for the Department of Defense. We have several DoD entities that are deploying today and up and live in there. And now I think the trend that we're seeing is really where agencies are looking to take that next step and really look at moving mission critical applications to the cloud. So we've already seen the jump to lift and shift with infrastructure as a service, but now we're seeing agencies really look at how do I take advantage of things like serverless computing, IoT, Internet of Things. How do I do things differently and how do I take advantage of hyperscale cloud, for example, at the edge? Right, in the disconnected world where we traditionally would see, software deployed on a single device living, say, for example, in a Humvee. Right? How do we actually take that capability that's living there in a disconnected state, yet still leverage the hyperscale cloud? And I think that's really where we're at now is, how do we take advantage of this technology as we move forward?
To the extent there has been hesitancy, and I think there has been some in DoD in fully adopting cloud technologies, how much of it has been driven by the perception that it's basically an all or nothing proposition for any given application, that you got to lift and drop all your email from a legacy system to the cloud, as opposed to maybe doing it in pieces, taking advantage of hybrid clouds and multi-cloud type architectures?
So I think it really depends on the workload. I think most agencies think of email as a complete all or nothing type of scenario. We haven't really seen too many agencies say, I want to live in a hybrid world where I have some of my email, in my server capacity living on premise and some living in the cloud. They actually want to move everything to the cloud and just have dial tone with a, price per seat, per user, per month type of environment. But on the mission critical application sides, when we start to look at even infrastructure services platform, that's where we're starting to see the hybrid architectures or multi-cloud architectures really pop up, where we want to be able to extend, for example, to the edge, an application where we're pulling data from a hyperscale cloud that has machine learning and big data analytics capabilities. How can I take data that I'm collecting at the edge, move that data into a hyperscale cloud, do some analysis on that data, and then take the results and the analytics from that and quickly send that to the warfighter or to the individual in the field to make better business decisions or tactical decisions.
I want to put a pin in that tactical edge piece because we should talk quite a bit more about that later. But let's go back to something you mentioned just a second ago, which is determining which workloads are suited here. I think there's been a recognition for a long time that some workloads are suited for the cloud and some aren't. And if anything, there's probably been a tendency to err on the side of saying we have to keep things in legacy environments when we maybe don't. So broadly, what's the right way to assess and bin those workloads?
So, what's interesting, if you think about cloud computing, most people think of the cloud, right, as it has to live outside of your data center. And the way really that Microsoft approaches this is cloud computing is a set of technology, right? It's really it's virtualized everything, right? From a virtual server to a virtual network to virtual storage. And the ability to take advantage of hyperscale compute. Now, hyperscale that you see in our clouds means lots of data centers to be able to expand capacity whenever you need it. But to be able to take advantage of the capabilities in the cloud that perhaps aren't hyperscale, but still leverage some of those cloud capabilities on premise is really where Microsoft is focused. So, for example, we have a product called Azure Stack, which is a converged appliance that takes some of the engineering and the innovation that we have inside our Azure cloud and extends that to a converged device that you can run on premise in either a disconnected or a connected state. So you can take advantage of things like platform as a service and infrastructure as a service at a scale that suits your need, but on premise. And so what we're really trying to do is kind of marry those two worlds so that when we look at workloads that have data that perhaps has to live behind a firewall or has to live at the tactical edge, that you can do that, but that you can still take that data and then leverage hyperscale computing capabilities like machine learning, big data analytics, and a variety of other capabilities in the cloud when you need it, and easily move that data back and forth for tactical advantage.
So yeah, let's actually talk about tactical for a minute now, because going back to what you said a second ago, in the consumer world, I think we've all been trained to think about cloud. The way we've been trained to think about cloud is that your data doesn't live on your desktop anymore. It's not necessarily being processed there anymore. It's in the cloud. So that of course depends on reliable, robust network connectivity, which you certainly cannot count on in a tactical environment. So what does it mean to think about using a cloud where you're certainly not assured, when you're in a degraded environment, or you should at least be counting on denied or degraded communications?
So I think there's kind of two challenges with network connectivity to the cloud. The first is as you state, with if I'm at the tactical edge and I only have satellite comms, and those comms are extremely limited, how do I know that I'm going to get the right data to the hyperscale cloud and get the right analytics back, right? So I can make that informed decision. And what we've been able to do is kind of use techniques like store and forward, message queuing, right, and secure communications, that you're actually securing that data as you send it back and forth in kind of a disconnected state, to be able to leverage the comms that you do have when you have them. And so there are ways that we can do that today, and do that in a secure manner. The second challenge is really when we think about taking advantage of hyperscale cloud. Historically, the way that agencies, whether you're a civilian agency and you're using the trusted internet connection, or you're a DoD entity and you're using the CAP, the cloud access point, is through this kind of single choke point, where we're running things like on the trusted internet connection, Einstein devices, right, to actually look at NetFlow data, analyze that NetFlow data. And that really, that type of technology really doesn't lend itself well to hyperscale cloud. And so what we're seeing now across the federal space, especially in the Department of Defense and with the new IT modernization report, is an increased focus on how do we look at this differently? All right, is NetFlow data the only thing we really need to look at, or do we need to look at security in a much different fashion as we start to extend our edge beyond our traditional data center walls, right, where we have guards and gates and guns, and we know, we used to just disconnect from the internet and we thought everything was great. Well, now we've extended that edge to this virtual world that consists of devices, right, running almost anywhere, to converged devices running in any data center, in a vehicle, to hyperscale clouds in a multi-cloud environment. And so how do you manage that virtual digital estate and look at security differently? And I think that's really where we're at right now from a federal industry perspective. Well,
as you say, my understanding of the current rules, at least, is that cloud access point is really your only option if you're dealing with level 4 or level 5 data, even though the department is looking at alternatives. Given the state of current technology, what might some of those alternatives be? What are better ways to do this rather than funneling everything through a single pipe?
So one of the things that we've been doing is really trying to help our customers understand how we look at security today when we manage our own cloud infrastructure, right, and our own data centers for our customers. And so when we look at this, it's really a question of what signal do you want to collect, right, to be able to identify that something bad has happened, right? And before we were kind of limited in the amount of data we could actually process as humans. Right. But now, introducing hyperscale cloud, you can actually look at large and vast amounts of data and see data correlations that you'd never be able to see before very quickly. And so the idea that in what we do internally and what we're extending now to our customers is the ability to collect all this signal, not just from the network or the physical device layer, but from the application layer. Who logged in where and when? What applications did they access? Right? What data did they access? Take all of that signal, right? All of that telemetry, put it in a single large data store, and then do data analysis on that so that you can get a better operational picture of what your security posture is across your virtual estate. And so when we look at, CAP and trusted internet connection capabilities, we were really focused on physical assets, right? The physical network. What am I seeing in NetFlow data? We weren't really looking at, did Susie log in with a valid CAC card, right, or PIV card from the same location, or maybe multi-factor authentication from two different locations, right, that are physically impossible, meaning that my identity's been compromised, but it's a valid identity from two different locations, physically impossible, and access data. We'd never be able to look at that or even find that anomaly before. And now we can quickly be alerted, right? Literally by just setting up configuration in an application, and then have policies that actually lock me out right away.
And so just to make sure I understand everything you're saying, right, all those security functions that you're describing at that point are then sort of baked into the cloud architecture itself, or handled as an aspect of the cloud architecture itself, instead of this third access point that we've told ourselves we can trust.
In a way, there's always third-party products that can be either hosted in the cloud, right, or deliver additional security capabilities on top of what any cloud provider can deliver. So, for example, right now we've invested heavily in a number of security companies and actually purchased a number of those. For example, Cloud App Security, a company called Adalom. The ability to actually bring those capabilities into our cloud is something we're heavily invested in, but we're not going to ever say that we're the security company. We want to be a security company and offer our customers the ability to manage that virtual estate, but then also give our customers the ability to use the best of breed security products hosted in our cloud or hosted on-premise in their data center.
All right, we're going to take a short break here, and we're going to talk some more about security in the cloud when we come back. Our guest today, Susie Adams, Chief Technology Officer at Microsoft Federal. I'm your moderator, Jared Serbu, on our discussion, Rethinking Security for the DoD Cloud and Tactical Edge, sponsored by Microsoft on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.